Well, it's good to be back in Toms River, and even better to be here at the fully rebuilt home of a New Jerseyan I've gotten to know very well over the last 7 years. A hardworking father, a U.S. Marine who served his country, and a true survivor, Doug Quinn. 7 years ago tomorrow, Doug was forced to flee his home in the middle of the night as Superstorm Sandy's massive storm surge pumped millions of gallons of the Barnegat Bay into his living room. Like thousands of his fellow New Jerseyans, Doug spent the next few days surveying the damage and making plans to rebuild. He figured he was one of the lucky ones. You see, Doug had flood insurance with full coverage. He always paid his premiums, and he thought the worst was behind him. Little did we know that his ordeal was just beginning. I'll never forget the letter Doug first sent me way back in 2014. He wrote, "I was in my home the night the floodwaters rushed in. I waded out through waist-deep water at midnight to escape while electrical transformers exploded and houses burned down." That was the easy part. It's the year and a half since then that has been the tragedy. You see, despite paying for the maximum flood insurance coverage of $250,000, and despite receiving estimates that showed up to $254,000 in damage, Doug only received $92,000 from his insurance company, or just over a third of what he needed to rebuild. His insurance company actually claimed that his foundation wasn't destroyed by Sandy's huge storm surge that washed away everything in its path, but rather that the soil moving around his house was the cause, as if it moved somehow magically by itself. It was ludicrous, and unfortunately Doug's story wasn't unique. Groups like Stop FEMA Now and the New Jersey Organizing Project brought together thousands of Sandy survivors living the same nightmare. That's why I launched the Senate investigation into the dysfunction at FEMA that uncovered systematic fraud and abuse. Eventually, we got the government to reopen the claims process for all Sandy survivors. More than 18,000 claims were reviewed, and over 15,000 people received money totaling $260 million that they had been previously denied. Of course, this is far from the only battle we had to fight. When homeowners were slated to get hit with triple-digit premium increases, I wrote and passed legislation to shield them from higher flood insurance rates, and that was moved into law. When FEMA threatened to close out the increased cost of compliance, or the ICC program, before Sandy survivors could access it, I successfully pushed for a 4-year extension. And now that we have a productive partner in the governor's office, I'm pleased to have worked with Governor Murphy to reallocate federal dollars to Sandy survivors who still need, 7 years tomorrow, who still need help getting back in their home. So look, I'm proud of the work we did together. I'm looking at that picture 7 years ago when we stood here at what was the left of Doug's home. Some of us looking a lot younger, Doug. That's not you, that's me. But I didn't come here to take a victory lap. I came here to tell a hard truth, which is that without real reform, we can expect the same exact problems we faced after Superstorm Sandy when the next storm comes. Indeed, it's happening already to homeowners across America who have been hit with catastrophic flooding from Texas to Louisiana to the upper Midwest and beyond. We can and must do better. No one should have to go through what Doug, his family, and others have gone through. And yet, as we speak, there's a bill moving through Congress that risks doubling flood insurance premiums every 4 years. Meanwhile, FEMA is switching to a new, totally untested system for measuring flood risk. And if the new model finds your home has more risk than previously calculated, you could face a premium hike of 18% per year. Simply put, we're facing a perfect storm that could drown New Jersey families in higher flood insurance premiums and risk sending the National Flood Insurance Program into a death spiral. That's why I recently introduced bipartisan legislation to reform the entire system. I say our legislation because it was informed by real-life experience of Sandy survivors like Doug. We include important consumer reforms that will protect future flood victims from the same kind of nightmare. We crack down on abusive practices by the flood insurance industry. We close loopholes like the ridiculous earth movement exclusion because, yes, you better believe that a 13-foot storm surge moves the soil under your home. We require that engineer reports be produced by, you guessed it, certified engineers. We hold insurance companies accountable if they lowball policyholders. We reform the appeals process and set real deadlines for FEMA so they can get back to homeowners in a timely fashion. And we allow homeowners to recover attorney fees if they have to sue. Simply put, we level the playing field for flood victims throughout the claims practice. Secondly, we make affordability a priority. We cap premium increases at half of the rate of the House bill and provide affordability assistance to low and middle income homeowners in high-cost states like New Jersey. I want to be clear, endless premium hikes are not a solution. If premiums get too expensive, people will opt out of paying for flood insurance altogether, and the whole system will collapse. This isn't rocket science, but it needs to be said because too many proposals floating around Congress suggest that the solution to make flood insurance available is so expensive that no one can buy it. Finally, we make bold investments in flood prevention and mitigation. Look, climate change is here. Its rising sea levels pose an existential threat to the Jersey Shore and coastal communities nationwide. I look forward to the day when America returns to this challenge because my grandchildren deserve better and they deserve action. But in the meantime, we've got to get smart about mitigation. Currently, the federal government's approach to flood policy is totally backwards. Instead of just dealing with the damage after a disaster, we need to focus on preventing costly floods in the first place. Every dollar spent on flood prevention generates another $6 in savings, 6 to 1. I'll take that return on investment any day. Our bill also sets aside hundreds of millions of dollars to improve local flood control infrastructure and buy out or elevate properties that repeatedly flood. The bottom line is that preventing flood damage is a lot more affordable than repairing flood damage, and we must make it a priority. I'm pleased there's strong bipartisan support for this legislation. How often do you get Senator Marco Rubio and Senator Elizabeth Warren to agree on anything? Well, they agree that our national flood insurance program is broken and it's time to do something about it, and I'm glad that they have joined me as well as Republican colleagues from Louisiana and elsewhere. And I'm pleased that the entire New Jersey delegation is on board. I applaud Congressman Pallone and Pasquale for leading the effort in the House. I also want to thank Congressman Kim for his steadfast support. But too many of our colleagues in Washington just want to hike premiums and call it a day. Others would rather kick the can down the road and pass short-term extensions rather than pass real reforms. Others want to privatize the program altogether, putting taxpayers on the hook for massive recovery bills when storms hit and no one has flood insurance. I believe the time for reform is now. When I visited Doug's storm-wrecked home back in 2014, I made a promise. I said I wouldn't stop fighting until he and his family could return home. It's been an honor to keep that promise, but I won't be satisfied until we fix what's broken. I won't sugarcoat things. Reforming the flood insurance program won't be easy, but things worth doing rarely are. And I believe that helping future storm victims avoid the nightmare Sandy survivors like Doug lived through is a just and worthy cause.